one thing that you're going to see throughout this trial is that the technology in Fulton County is not stellar, it's not the best, and it's not the most high-tech equipment. So at times you're going to experience, along with us, lags, and in this instance, PowerPoint is we click from slide to slide, lags as we play videos. So if we just ask you to remain patient. I know a lot of you guys, either in IT or have spouses, family members, and friends who are in IT, so you're used to the fastest and the best. You're in the wrong place for that. So I'll apologize on behalf of all the parties in advance. 8 bullet holes. 8 holes, defects from bullets in the vehicle that Secoriea Turner was seated in the back seat playing on her phone. 8 bullets fired into the Jeep that Mr. Omar Ivory was driving, that her mom, Charmaine Turner, was seated in the front passenger seat, and little 8-year-old Secoriea Turner seated in the back seat, doing what 8-year-olds do, playing on a cell phone, looking at TikTok. No one knew that on July 4th of 2020, as this vehicle that Secoriea was playing, had a great day, celebrating the 4th of July, would be the last day that she'd be alive. No one knew that this would be the last moment that Secoriea Turner would get to play on TikTok, would get to make a TikTok, would be the last moments that her mother, Charmaine Turner, would hear her laugh. When they woke up that morning, they had no idea that these would be the last moments that she'd ever spend with her 8-year-old. And why? Because the conscious, intentional, and deliberate actions of this defendant on July 4th of 2020, when he consciously and intentionally pointed his rifle, AR-style firearm, at the Jeep as it traveled around what you'll learn and hear about throughout this trial, a makeshift barricade blocked off by large orange blocks and orange cones that we see on the roads for construction. When the Jeep that Secoriea Turner did not submit to the authority of this defendant and his gang members, he intentionally pointed and pulled the trigger of his AR-15 style rifle, firing it into the vehicle that Secoriea was just trying to get home. Get home to continue to celebrate the 4th of July, that fellowship with her family like we all do on the 4th of July, celebrating America and fireworks and fun. But that all ended because of the acts of this defendant. One bullet that traveled through the back of this Jeep, traveled through the trunk, traveled through the seat, and traveled into the back of 8-year-old Secoriea Turner, killing her on July 4th, 2020. Having 8 short years of life with her family, with her friends, her hopes and dreams of being a student at Spelman ended in those few moments. Now, what you're going to learn through the course of this trial, and the evidence is going to show, is that little Secoriea, she loved to dance, she loved to play on TikTok, she loved to make TikToks, she was happy, she was full of life, she was full of joy. She loved to read, she loved to learn. And because she loved to read and learn, she had already decided that she wanted to be a student at Spelman and would talk to her mom all the time about how excited, even though she was 8, that she was going to college at Spelman here in Atlanta. She loved her family. And all of that came to an end because of the senseless gun violence, the senseless, deliberate actions of this defendant when he fired his rifle into the vehicle that Secoriea was traveling in. Now, I want to talk to you, and we covered some of this yesterday and the day before on Monday, about the summer of 2020 and what was going on not only throughout the country, but specifically here in Atlanta. It was a time that most of us had never experienced. It was an unprecedented time. It was a time where we were going through a global pandemic. We were experiencing surges during the summer of COVID-19. In conjunction with that, we were experiencing civil unrest because of protests that were supporting, rightfully so, racial injustice, trying to fight for change. But during the summer of 2020, as we moved into July 4th, at 1238 Pryor Road, near the Wendy's, Rayshard Brooks was shot and killed. And as a result of him being killed, that Wendy's the next day, on June 13th, was burned out. As many of you had heard, we talked about it yesterday and the day before, about what we remembered, what we read, the information we had processed as it relates to what happened to Mr. Brooks. And as a result of the shooting and the death of Mr. Brooks, there were protests throughout the city of Atlanta. There were protests specifically at the Wendy's where he was killed. And as we all are aware, that Wendy's was burned out. And that Wendy's, that area of 1238 Pryor Road, the intersection of University and Pryor, became a hub or a place where protests would happen often, where people would come to gather and support each other. But that changed as time moved on, as time continued. It became more focused on things of violence, things that led to the death of little Secoriea Turner. And what you're going to see and what you're going to learn throughout this trial, you're tired of seeing maps and hearing us talk about locations. This is the general location we asked you about yesterday. We talked about how you're familiar with it, how often you've been driven by it, and things of that nature. And this is the package store, which will be central to the facts and the evidence, as well as the BP, the area where the Wendy's was, and further down where you can see that there are warehouses on University Avenue. Now, as we move through the trial and as the evidence and the testimony unfolds, you're going to hear about, on July 4th, the conditions and the description and what 1238 Pryor Road, the intersection with University, looked like. What the conditions were, the people who were out there. You're going to hear about the fact that the police had coined the term or called this an autonomous zone, where during this time, the defendant and members of his gang had taken advantage of the fact that there was minimal police presence due to the unrest as it relates to police brutality and things of that nature. And what you're going to learn, what we talked about, is that they set up a barricade, a checkpoint, an armed checkpoint in this community and your community, making it to where they controlled everything. They controlled the authority of who could come and go and pass based on the blockades and the barricades that they had set up. They were armed with firearms to control and to assert their authority. And what you'll see, and as you will find out, when you don't submit to that authority, there's consequences. And Secoriea Turner paid those consequences because Omar Ivory, a member of this community, had the audacity, in their eyes, to not submit to their authority, to not allow them to control his egress and ingress. He went around the barricades, and as a result, they shot into his car. You're going to see video surveillance. You're going to see a lot of photographs. These are examples of what the barricades look like. The large orange blocks, the construction cones that we see, unfortunately, all around the courthouses. We all travel the next couple of days here and back. Now, you're going to hear from a lot of witnesses who are going to be able to describe the conditions of July 4th, 2020. Members of this community, employees and people who work in the area. You're going to hear from Gerald Kenmore, who is a individual, a male who had been a MARTA bus driver at this time. He had worked with MARTA and was very familiar with the city and drove many routes throughout the city. On July 4th of 2020, his route included the University and Pryor Road area he stops. He's going to talk about the barricades that he experienced, the having to ask permission to move throughout the city in that area, that he saw individuals armed with rifles that he was forced to stop. And the only way he could ever get through is if he asked permission, and he was granted that permission. You're also going to hear from members of that community, Chris and Samantha McCord. And you're going to hear about their experience on July 4th of 2020, when they attempted just to go home, just like Secoriea and her family, just to get across the barriers right over the second blockade where their home was. And they were denied access. Chris and Samantha McCord are going to talk about the fear that they felt, the anger that they felt, that they couldn't go to their home and their community that they had invested in, that they loved, that these people were preventing them from enjoying what they helped build and create. You're going to hear from Mr. McCord and Mrs. McCord to tell you that the firearms that the individuals, to include the defendant, pointed at their heads and at their vehicle as they told them they weren't allowed to pass through. How they told Mr. McCord he was acting disrespectful, and how they made Mr. McCord turn around. What you're going to learn is shortly after the McCords were not granted access is when Secoriea and her family were driving in the area. What Charmaine and Mr. Omar are going to tell you is that they had spent the day with family. They had spent the day having fun on the 4th of July at Miss Turner's mother's house, that the family had gathered. They barbecued. They had shot off fireworks. They did what most people do on the 4th of July. And that they were coming home roughly a little after 9:30, and they got off at the Pryor Road and University Avenue, exit off I-75. And they got up there because their home was not far from it, and they needed to stop at the local package store, the All-American package store. And as they drove up to the intersection, Mr. Ivory will tell you that in looking at it, he believed it was closed. He saw that some of the windows were dark and boarded up. So he didn't stop there, is what Ms. Turner and Mr. Ivory will tell you. And what they'll tell you is they were going to go home. That their house was on the other side of the barricades, and they hadn't encountered the barricades before. They saw them, and Mr. Ivory will tell you that as he approached the area where the barricades were, he went around. He didn't stop. He went around the first barricade, and as soon as he did that, there was gunfire at his feet. They'll tell you the fear that they felt. They will tell you the moments in which the gunfire is entering their vehicle, going past their heads and their bodies, and how they survived by the grace of God. And what they'll both tell you, and what Charmaine will tell you, is in the moments as the gunfire is occurring, she hears her daughter cry out, "Mama! Mama! I've been shot." She hears her 8-year-old little girl sitting in the back seat on their way home scream her name for the very last time. Because of the deliberate actions of this defendant, because someone had the audacity not to stop at this unlawful barricade, at this unlawful checkpoint. What both Ms. Turner and Mr. Ivory will tell you is they made it past the second barricade. They pulled over shortly down the road to attend to Secoriea. Ms. Turner will tell you that she dove into the back seat. She will tell you that she did everything in her power to keep her daughter alive, to try to stop the bleeding, to do whatever she could do to provide any medical assistance to keep her little 8-year-old with her. What both Mr. Ivory and Ms. Turner will tell you is they attempted to call 911. At that time, 911 was experiencing a high volume of calls. And Mr. Ivory will tell you that he called and couldn't get through. He will tell you that as he was making the decision to stay where he was and continue to call 911 or to go to the nearest hospital. And what he'll tell you is he kept calling 911 and he eventually got through, but his instincts, his gut told him he couldn't wait. So while he's on the phone with 911, and you'll hear he's talking and walking them through the fact that they're driving to the hospital, and he's taking little Secoriea to the Atlanta Medical Center. He's doing everything in his power as her mother attempts to try to stop the bleeding, trying to keep Secoriea away. Now, the evidence will show, and you'll hear from officers and detectives, that Mr. Omar did arrive at Atlanta Medical Center. When he arrived, he was followed by an officer who was close in the area who saw Mr. Ivory kind of speeding through the city, down Boulevard, and into Atlanta Medical Center. And you'll see and hear from this officer, you'll see his body cam of the urgency in which they arrived, and you'll see the moment that Secoriea is taken from the back seat. She's rushed into the emergency room, and what the evidence will show, what the testimony will be, is that they tried everything medically possible to save this little girl. They tried everything. But nothing they did could stop, could fix what this defendant did to this little girl. You will hear Mr. Maine and Mr. Ivory about the moments when they find out that Secoriea didn't make it. That she was never going home. That they were going to be leaving the Atlanta Medical Center without their 8-year-old little girl. And Ms. Turner will tell you how awful that moment was, how it changed her life and her family's life forever. How nothing has ever been the same since Secoria's death. You will hear from additional officers who responded to the Atlanta Medical Center because of the call of little Secoriea arriving with a gunshot wound to the back. You will hear from detectives from the homicide unit how the investigation began, how Sergeant Epps was the first officer with the City of Atlanta Police Department to arrive right behind Mr. Ivory, Ms. Turner, and little Secoriea, and how he notified homicide, and how the investigation began, unfolded, and moved from the scene of where Secoriea died to the scene of where she was shot near the Wendy's at 1238 Prior Street. And what the evidence and testimony will show, and what will be admitted into evidence, as I said, 911 call, both from Mr. Ivory as well as from Mr. McCord and his wife. You will hear about statements witnesses made on the scene, and they'll testify in court about it. You will hear about the defendant's distinctive clothing, a very important piece of evidence as to how the detectives with the City of Atlanta Homicide Unit are able to track and identify this defendant. You will hear about the defendant's actions after the shooting. And you will hear about statements this defendant made with his counsel during a press conference shortly after Secoriea was murdered. Now, the timeline of events will be set up by the 911 call. That's where the chronology starts, relates to the investigation, and Detective Julian Shepard, who was assigned as the lead detective in the homicide unit. And he will tell you he was able to locate the call at approximately at 9:45 p.m. from Mr. McCord, referencing how he'd been held at gunpoint, how guns had been pointed at him and his wife's head at their vehicle. So you will hear about the 911 call through Detective Shepard that he was able to locate that Omar made. And like I said, you hear about the hardest decision Mr. Ivory had to make in determining whether he should remain and continue to try to get a hold of 911 or attempt to get the quickest medical care by driving Secoriea to the City of Atlanta, Atlanta Medical Center. You will also hear, again, from Sergeant Epps, who will talk about how he saw the Jeep speeding, how he could tell based on the way that the car was driving and his training experience that this car was trying to get medical help as fast as possible. And Detective Shepard will talk about the first steps that he took after being assigned the lead detective in this case, how he attempted to canvass the scene and talk to witnesses, how the crime scene was photographed and processed, and evidence was collected. He will tell you, along with several crime scene vets that responded, about the area, and when they arrived, they had to move quickly through the scene because it wasn't safe. There were still members of the community, there were still members of the violent protests that night with guns on scene. So as they are focusing on processing the scene, they're also focused on their safety and making sure that they can do their job in the safest way possible for everybody still remaining out there. And Detective Shepard's going to tell you about the difficulty he had in canvassing and speaking to witnesses, the unwillingness of people to provide information, and how that affected his investigation, and how he had to move through his investigation in different ways and look for evidence in ways that he typically has not done in the past. He will tell you about his interview with Miss Julian Turner that we talked about. He will tell you about his interview with Mr. Ivory. He will talk to you about his interactions with Mr. McCord and his experience that night on July 4th. He will also talk to you about the members of his team in the City of Atlanta Homicide Unit and how they assisted, and how members of Homeland Security, specifically you'll hear from Investigator T, how he assisted in the process, how he utilized all different units throughout the City of Atlanta Police Department in order to get justice for little 8-year-old Secoriea Turner. He started because of the resistance that he was receiving that night as it relates to witnesses speaking, as to finding people willing to make statements. He did a Be on the Lookout, a flyer that was distributed through the media, through news outlets, on social media, asking for anyone to come forward to assist in any information as it relates to the death of Secoriea Turner. He will tell you that he continued to receive information. He will tell you he continued to canvass the area for any video surveillance that could have captured anything that happened during the moments of Secoria's death. And what he'll tell you is that an assisting investigator with Homeland Security, Investigator Jason T, was able to recover and extract several hours of footage from the surrounding businesses through just doing knock and talks, asking for help as it relates to the owners of the All-American Package Store, the owners of the BP gas station, and a warehouse that was just past the area of the second half of the barricade, just past the area where Omar Ivory had pulled off to the side as everyone tried to save Secoriea. And what you will see and what you will hear about is the angles and the footage that was able to be recovered. And I know we're all used to CSI and all the other different crime scene shows that are on TV with our 4K and clear as ever video surveillance, rings that seem to capture, ring cameras that seem to capture everything, even if there isn't movement, even though they're supposed to be motion activated. But you will learn, ladies and gentlemen, that's TV. That the camera footage that we were able to locate as it relates to the moments before, during, and after Secoria's death is not 4K. It doesn't capture every angle on the scene. It doesn't capture outside of certain areas where the cameras don't reach. What you're going to notice is that the cameras are not as clear as it shows on Criminal Minds, capturing every angle and aspect of someone's face, clothing, and things of that nature. What Detective Shepard will tell you is that after Detective T was able to locate the video surveillance from the 3 businesses, he then watched hours of footage, having to piece and connect the footage together so he could get a full 360, 180 view of certain angles so he could get justice for Secoriea. This is the view he was able to get from the BP gas station, and just on the left of the screen is just outside of this camera would be the warehouse where he was able to pull video surveillance that pointed in the direction of the BP. That's what we're seeing here. So what Detective Shepard will talk to you about in his review and hours of review footage is he was able to locate the time in which the McCords pulled into the liquor store parking lot after they had experienced being held at gunpoint, after they had been told they couldn't come through, after they were made to turn around. And you'll see on the video surveillance, the reports get out, looking confused, scared, wondering what happened, why they weren't able to move through. And you'll see the defendant in his distinctive clothing, his jeans with faded out areas on his thighs and down towards his shins. You'll see that he's in a distinctive red shirt with white writing. You will learn through witnesses that the writing on the back of the shirt talks about Piru Bloods, Elm Street. And you will learn the significance as it relates to that and this defendant being a member and associate of the Piru Bloods gang. Detective Shepard will tell you that in his review of the footage, he was able to locate two persons of interest at the beginning of the investigation that he identified. The defendant being the individual in the red, and then in the white t-shirt and the black jeans, the co-defendant, Mr. Jerry McKinney. And what I'll say as it relates to Mr. McKinney is that we're here for the trial of Mr. Conley. Mr. McKinney is not on trial before this jury at this time. Your focus as it relates to the guilt and innocence is on Mr. Conley. Mr. McKinney is not attached or a part of this trial that is before each and every one of you during the next couple of days. And what Detective Shepard will tell you is that he continued to review footage. And as he reviewed footage, he saw shortly before the shooting a MARTA bus. And through his number of years with the City of Atlanta Police Department, he knew that MARTA buses typically had cameras. And for once, he knew that this was an agency, this was a transportation industry that had great cameras, that had camera footage that we would hope to see on TV. Camera footage that reveals details of your face and your clothing. So he reached out to members of the MARTA Police Department and MARTA Transportation, and he was able to identify that bus that was on the route to the University of Pryor. He was able to identify the driver. He was able to get the camera footage. And from his review and receiving of the camera footage, he was able to get the photographs of Mr. McKinney. He was able to use the video footage to take screenshots of the details of Mr. McKinney, of Mr. Conley. His red shirt, his rifle, his black bag that he had over his body. He then put that in a BOLO, or Crime Stoppers Tips flyer, in which he again released throughout the city, through the media, through canvassing, going from person to person, house to house, asking if they recognized the person in the flyer. And as he did that, he did the same as it relates to Mr. McKinney, as he was able to get clear footage or clear pictures to distribute as it relates to him as a person of interest for the murder of Secoriea Turner. What you will learn and what you will hear and see is that as a result of these flyers, as a result of the media blast of the BOLO related to this defendant, Julian Conley, he came forward on July 13th of 2020. When I say he came forward in a press conference that he had arranged with his counsel at the time in front of several news outlets, one being in front of Tom Jones with WSB-TV, and other media outlets, Fox 5 with Angelique Proctor, where they all met in a central location, a central area, and he made statements while on or during the press conference that his counsel made statements on his behalf as it relates to his picture being distributed as a person of interest. How he admitted that the person in the red shirt with the white writing, with the AR-style rifle hanging from his body, and that black bag was him. That picture was of him. That he was on the scene at the time Secoriea Turner was killed. You will see distinct differences just a few days later in Mr. Conley's appearance. You'll see that he's changed his appearance. He's cut his hair. It's nothing like the photos that you see, that you saw previously, where he had longer hair and twists that were coming down. And like I said, he made statements as it relates to identifying himself in the video that had been distributed by the City of Atlanta Police Department. And what Detective Shepard will tell you, again, the distinct difference in his appearance on July 4th and July 13th during the press conference. And as Detective Shepard saw, like all of us, we happened to be watching the news, watched it live, learned information, and took that information and added it to his investigation. Added it to the hours and hours of video footage that he had watched. Because he now has identified the individual that he saw shooting at the vehicle in the red shirt with the white writing and the large rifle as Mr. Ivory passed through and around the barricade. And what Detective Shepard will tell you is that a day and a half later, from the conference that the defendant held, he took out arrest warrants. And what Detective Shepard will tell you is that a common practice is once arrest warrants are taken out, they're turned over to the Fugitive Task Force team for assistance in locating and apprehending a suspect in which warrants have been sworn out for. And what Detective Shepard will also tell you is that as that was done, as the Fugitive Task Force began to do their part of the investigation in locating the defendant, the defendant's attorney, Jackie Patterson, who now goes by the fly lawyer Patterson, as you will hear. During that time, he reached out and arranged for Julian Conley to turn himself in. And then on July 15th of 2020, the defendant was taken into custody and placed under arrest. Now, you are also going to hear from experts that will be utilized during the state case in chief. You'll hear from the chief medical examiner, Dr. Karen Sullivan, and she will talk to you about the autopsy that she did on 8-year-old Secoriea Turner. She'll talk about the cause of death, which was the gunshot wound that she received to her back. She'll talk about the manner of death, how she classified it as a homicide. She will describe to you, and you will hear about a rifle projectile that was removed from Secoria's little body. And she'll talk to you, and you will see photographs of the hole and how large it is. And she'll tell you that's typical, not unusual, an individual shot with a high-powered rifle round, like Secoriea was. You will hear, toward the end of this trial, from Sarah Van Holm with the Georgia Bureau of Investigations. Ms. Van Holm will talk to you about her expertise and what she's been doing at the GBI for a number of years. That she's a firearms examiner, and that she has examined, analyzed, and made determinations about hundreds of different projectiles and ballistics evidence that she has compared. She will tell you that she received a number of ballistics evidence collected from the crime scene where Secoriea was shot. She will tell you she received that projectile that was removed from Secoria's body. And what Ms. Van Holm will tell you is that in her comparison of 7 shell casings, cartridge casings, as Ms. Van Holm will call them, in her comparison of those shell casings, she will be able to tell you that all of them came from one gun and that they were all fired from an AR-15 rifle. She will also tell you that the single bullet that was removed from Secoria's body is consistent with being fired from an AR-15 style firearm. Same caliber of ammunition, 5.56, 45, as the 7 shell casings that were collected from the scene. You will also hear from another member of the GBI back in 2020, Jared Coleman. You will hear about his qualifications. You will hear about his experience and his training in gangs throughout the country, throughout the state of Georgia, and the number of years that he has worked and documented different gang members, identified different signs, and things of that nature. And he will tell you about how he's able to make this determination about the gang evidence that he reviewed, about how the gang element is connected to and part of the cause of Secoria's murder. He will tell you about what we talked about here today, that members of the Pyru Blood gang seized control of the intersection of University and Pryor. He will tell you that that seizure of that intersection was to admit a dominance, gain a position of dominance of that territory, of that area where Mr. Brooks was killed, and his connection, God bless you, to Ivory Bloods, and how that this seizure was done via the armed checkpoint. And he will talk about the importance of a refusal to submit, a refusal to recognize the authority of these gang members, and how that refusal is met with violence, and here specifically gun violence. Now, as the judge mentioned earlier, again, this isn't like TV. The technology, as you've seen throughout this presentation, is poor. What I want you to keep in mind is that we're giving you pens and paper, old school style, where you can take notes. I would encourage you to take notes, because though Madam Court Reporter is constantly typing and having to take down all the things that we say that don't make sense, the things that she can't understand, we can't give you a transcript of that as you go back to deliberate. Your transcript will be your notes. Your memory will depend on each and every one of your collective taking notes. So I encourage you to take notes and to pay attention during the testimony and evidence, because everything that's presented to you is important. Everything that is presented to you is to get justice for 8-year-old Secoriea Turner. And what I want you to remember is that 8-year-old Secoriea, her family, the McCords, Mr. Camber, other witnesses who will testify throughout this trial, they're not on trial. He is. He's on trial for his actions on July 4th of 2020. And what the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, there was no excuse, there's no mitigation, and there's absolutely no justification for what this defendant and the members of his gang did to little 8-year-old Secoriea on July 4th, 2020. Their actions show nothing more than the fact that they have no regard at all for human life, no regard for a precious little 8-year-old Secoriea Turner who was just trying to get home. The only thing that the evidence will show as it relates to this defendant and what he wanted and what he was concerned about was escaping the responsibility for his actions, to not being held accountable for the things that he, ladies and gentlemen, is responsible for from July 4th of 2020. And that's your job, ladies and gentlemen. Your job is to listen to the testimony and evidence. And at the end of this trial, hold this defendant accountable. Hold him responsible for the things he did on July 4th of 2020. For cutting Secoria's life short, for only allowing her to live a very short 8 years, making her hopes and dreams of Spelman a reality that will never come true, making it so Ms. Turner will never hear her daughter laugh, see her dance, do the things that she loves. And the evidence will be clear during the course of this trial that this defendant acted intentionally, he acted deliberately, and consciously made the decision to point, shoot, and pull that trigger at the vehicle that Secoriea was just trying to get home in. The evidence will be clear. And at the end of this trial, ladies and gentlemen, myself, my co-counsel, Ms. Young, will have the opportunity to address you again, have the opportunity to talk to you about the injustice that little 8-year-old Secoriea Turner had to endure at the hands of this defendant. And we will have the absolute privilege to stand before you and ask that you return the only verdict that speaks the truth, and that this defendant is guilty of each and every charge in this indictment that you've heard about during the beginning of one year. We ask that you hold Julian Conley accountable for his deliberate acts that caused the death of Secoriea Turner, and find him guilty on all counts. Thank you.